Silver tears rolled down Haynewell's alabaster cheeks as she stared at her reflection in the crystalline walls of her chambers. The delicate features of her face, with their subtle luminescence, reminded her of everything that set her species apart from the creatures she would soon be forced to call family. Her silver hair floated gracefully around her head, responding to her emotional distress with gentle movements, a trait unique to the stellar people. The morning had started like any other in the grand palace of the stellar empire. Haynewell had been studying ancient texts about diplomatic relations when her father's summons came. She'd walked the shimmering corridors to his private chambers, expecting another lesson in royal duties. Instead, her world had crumbled around her. The humans have proposed a marriage alliance, Emperor Tao had said, his voice carrying the weight of countless stars. Their ambassador's son will be your husband. Haynewell had stood frozen, her mind refusing to process the words. The humans, those primitive beings who had somehow stumbled their way into space travel, the same species whose military reports showed them fighting like animals, whose technological advancement seemed to focus primarily on ways to destroy rather than create. "Father, please," she had whispered, her voice trembling. "There must be another way. Trade agreements, perhaps, or a military alliance." But Emperor Tao had merely shaken his head, his own silver hair reflecting the ambient light of the chamber. "The human territories border our outer colonies. Their population grows faster than any species we've encountered. Their military, while primitive, is surprisingly effective. We need this alliance, daughter." Haynewell paced her chambers now, her ceremonial robes trailing behind her like stardust. The walls rippled with her movement, the living crystal responding to her presence as it had since she was a child. These same walls had witnessed her first steps, her first achievements in quantum mathematics, her mastery of the ancient arts of stellar manipulation. And now they would witness her sacrifice to what she considered little more than clever animals. She walked to her data terminal, fingers trembling as she accessed the historical archives. Images of humans filled her screen. Their strange, flat faces, their dull eyes that didn't shine with inner light, their coarse hair that remained stubbornly still no matter their emotional state. How could she be expected to bond with such a creature? "Princess," a soft voice called from her doorway. Her handmaiden, Mira, stood there with concern evident in her glowing eyes. "The Emperor requests your presence at the evening meal. The human delegation arrives tomorrow." Tomorrow. The word felt like a physical blow. Haynewell's hair dulled slightly, reflecting her despair. "Tell me, Mira," she said softly, "have you ever seen a human up close?" Mira shook her head. "Only in transmissions, Your Highness. They seem different." "Different," Haynewell repeated with a bitter laugh. "They're savages who learned to build spaceships. Did you know they still eat actual animals? Their bodies can't even process pure energy like civilized beings." She turned back to the data terminal, pulling up military footage. Human soldiers fighting with what seemed like primitive weapons by stellar standards, but their effectiveness was undeniable. Their ships, while lacking the organic beauty of stellar vessels, had proven surprisingly resilient in border skirmishes. "The outer colonies are worried," Emperor Tao had explained during their morning meeting. "The humans breed quickly, expand aggressively. This marriage could prevent centuries of warfare. Would you condemn our people to that, daughter?" Haynewell pressed her forehead against the cool crystal wall, letting its soothing energy flow through her. Her father was right. She knew he was right. As a princess of the stellar empire, her duty was to her people first. Personal happiness came second to the greater good of their civilization. But as night fell and the natural bioluminescence of her chambers adjusted to the darkness, Haynewell couldn't stop the tears from falling. Tomorrow, she would meet the human who would become her husband. Tomorrow, she would have to smile and pretend she wasn't repulsed by the very thought of being near him. Tomorrow, she would begin the end of her life as she knew it. As she prepared for sleep, she caught a glimpse of herself in the crystal walls one last time. The proud princess of the stellar empire, reduced to a peace offering for primitives. Her hair had darkened to a stormy gray, matching her mood perfectly. "May the ancient stars give me strength," she whispered the traditional prayer, her voice breaking slightly. "For I fear I am not strong enough for this task alone." That night, as she lay in her floating bed, Newell dreamed of Earth, a primitive world of dirt and water, so different from the crystalline beauty of her home. In her dreams, she was trapped there, surrounded by humans who couldn't understand her, couldn't see her inner light, couldn't comprehend the sophisticated beauty of her culture. She woke up multiple times, each time reaching out to touch the living crystal of her walls, reassuring herself that she was still home. For now, at least she was still home. The human diplomatic vessel emerged from hyperspace like a silver arrow piercing the darkness. Newell stood at her private viewing chamber, expecting to see something crude and utilitarian. Instead, the ship that approached the crystalline docks of the stellar empire displayed an unexpected elegance, its hull gleaming under the light of their binary suns. Newell had chosen her observation spot in the grand hall carefully, hidden behind a column of living crystal that pulsed with soft blue light. Her silver hair was carefully arranged to remain still, masking any betrayal of her emotional state. She would watch these humans first, she had decided, before being forced to meet them face to face. The airlock cycled, and Newell held her breath. The first to emerge were human security personnel, their movements precise and measured. Then came the diplomatic staff, dressed in formal attire that, while different from stellar fashion, showed careful attention to detail and respect for the occasion. But it was Ambassador Jinho Park who caught and held her attention. He moved with a fluid grace she hadn't expected from a human, each step purposeful yet natural. His dark eyes seemed to take in everything at once, appreciative but not overwhelmed by the grand crystalline architecture surrounding him. There was something in his bearing that spoke of both strength and wisdom, a combination that Newell had not expected to find in a human. The formal reception began with traditional stellar music, the crystal chambers resonating with harmonic frequencies that usually made other species uncomfortable. Yet the human delegation showed no signs of distress. Ambassador Jinho's expression was one of genuine appreciation, his head tilted slightly as he listened to the complex harmonies. It happened during the third movement of the welcome ceremony. A young stellar child, no more than 5 cycles old, had been chosen to present the traditional greeting flowers. The little one's hair was glowing with excitement, perhaps too excited, as she rushed forward with the crystal bouquet. Her small foot caught on the hem of her ceremonial robe, and she pitched forward. Time seemed to slow. Newell saw several of her people reach out, but they were too far away. The crystal flowers, worth more than some planetary systems, were about to shatter on the floor along with the dignity of the ceremony. But then Ambassador Jinho moved. His reaction was so quick, so smooth, that at first Newell thought she must have imagined it. One moment he was standing formally with the delegation. The next he was crouched beside the child, one hand steadying her while the other caught the crystal bouquet. But it was what happened next that truly surprised Newell. Instead of simply helping the child up and returning to his position, Jinho knelt down to her level. His voice was soft, gentle, as he spoke to the frightened little one. "That was quite an adventure, wasn't it?" he said in perfectly accented stellar language. "You know, on Earth, we have a saying. It's not about how many times you fall, but how many times you get back up." The child's hair, which had dulled to a worried gray, began to sparkle again. Jinho carefully helped her to her feet, handed back the bouquet, and gave her an encouraging smile. "Shall we try again? I would be honored to receive these beautiful flowers from such a brave young lady." Newell found herself moving closer, drawn by the unexpected warmth in the scene. The child's second attempt at the presentation was perfect, her hair now glowing with pride instead of shame. Jinho accepted the crystal flowers with all the proper ceremonial gestures, as if he had been born to their customs. From her closer vantage point, Newell could see his eyes clearly for the first time. They weren't the dull, lifeless orbs she had expected from humans. Instead, they held a depth of intelligence and compassion that caught her off guard. When he smiled at the child, the expression reached those eyes, making them crinkle at the corners in a way that was not entirely unpleasant. The rest of the ceremony proceeded without incident, but Newell found her attention repeatedly drawn to the ambassador. He handled each ritual with respect and understanding, never once making the common mistakes most outsiders made when dealing with stellar customs. His responses were thoughtful, his questions insightful, and his manner impeccably diplomatic. As the formal reception drew to a close, Newell realized with a start that she had completely forgotten to maintain her usual disdain for humans. She had been so absorbed in observing Jin-Ho that she hadn't once thought about his species' supposed inferiority. The revelation was unsettling. Perhaps, she whispered to herself, her hair shifting slightly with uncertainty, I should reserve judgment until I know more. It wasn't acceptance, not yet, but it was the first crack in the wall of prejudice she had built around her heart. The crystal gardens shimmered under the light of 3 moons, their bioluminescent flowers casting patterns of light that danced across the pathways. Newell walked among them, seeking the peace she always found in this place. Her silver hair floated gently around her face, reflecting the soft blues and purples of the night-blooming crystal roses. She hadn't expected anyone else to be here at this hour. Most of the palace residents respected her unofficial claim to the gardens after sunset. So when she heard a soft gasp of wonder from around the corner, she nearly turned back. But curiosity got the better of her as she recognized the voice that followed. Extraordinary, Jin-Ho murmured, not aware of her presence. He was crouched beside a cluster of starflowers, his hand hovering just above their glowing petals. The flowers, sensitive to body heat, pulsed gently in response to his proximity. Newell found herself watching him, intrigued by his obvious fascination. Most visitors to the gardens focused on the larger, more spectacular displays. Yet here was Jin-Ho, completely absorbed by one of the smallest and most subtle species in their collection. The bioluminescence responds to thermal variations, she said before she could stop herself. Even the slightest change in temperature creates a reaction. Jin-Ho looked up, but showed no sign of being startled by her sudden appearance. His eyes held the same warmth she'd noticed during the ceremony. Princess Newell, he said, rising smoothly to his feet. I hope I'm not intruding on your private time. These gardens are open to all diplomatic guests, she replied formally, though something in his manner made the words feel stiff and unnecessary. They remind me of creatures we have on Earth, he said, turning back to the flowers. In our deepest oceans, where no sunlight reaches, life has found a way to create its own light. Like these beautiful flowers, they've evolved to communicate through luminescence. His knowledge surprised her. You study xenobotany? She asked, moving closer despite her previous reservations about being near humans. Jin-Ho's laugh was warm and genuine. Among other things, on Earth, we have a saying, knowledge is like a garden. If it is not cultivated, it cannot be harvested. We have a similar saying. Newell found herself responding, though ours refers to stellar nurseries rather than gardens. They began walking together along the crystal paths, their conversation flowing naturally from one topic to another. Jin-Ho asked intelligent questions about stellar cultivation techniques, sharing comparable examples from Earth's history of botanical research. Your species has achieved remarkable things with crystalline integration, he observed, studying the towering arch of living crystal that pulsed with soft light. We're only beginning to understand the possibilities of organic mineral hybridization. Newell found herself explaining the basic principles, surprised by his quick grasp of complex concepts. The crystal responds to both biological and emotional inputs, she demonstrated, touching a nearby formation. The crystal brightened in response, its color shifting to match her hair. Like your hair, Jin-Ho noted thoughtfully. It's a visual representation of emotional states, isn't it? We humans have to rely on more subtle cues, facial expressions, body language. You're very observant, Newell said, realizing her hair had taken on a warm, interested glow. She quickly tried to control it, but Jin Ho's gentle smile suggested he had already noticed. Their conversation drifted to art, philosophy, and the nature of consciousness itself. Hey Newell found herself laughing at his subtle observations and clever wordplay. His humor wasn't crude as she had expected from a human, but rather thoughtful and often profound. The gardens seemed to respond to their discussion, the bioluminescent flowers glowing brighter as they passed. Or perhaps, Hey Newell realized, they were responding to her own brightening mood. She had forgotten to maintain her distance, forgotten even that Jin Ho was human. Hours passed like minutes. They had covered topics ranging from quantum physics to poetry, each discovery of shared interests or respectful disagreements adding new dimensions to their interaction. The three moons had tracked well across the sky before Hey Newell realized how long they had been talking. "I should return to my chambers," she said reluctantly. "Tomorrow's negotiations will require clear minds." Jin Ho nodded, his expression suggesting he too was surprised by how much time had passed. "Thank you for sharing your knowledge of the gardens," he said, "and for the conversation. It has been illuminating." As Hey Newell walked back to her chambers, she found herself reviewing their interaction. She had expected to find him primitive, simple-minded, or at best formally polite. Instead, she had discovered a mind as quick and curious as her own, wrapped in a warmth and genuine interest that had somehow slipped past her defenses. Her hair, she noticed with a start, was still glowing with the soft colors of pleasure and engagement. For the first time since hearing of the arranged marriage, she felt something besides dread when thinking of the future. It wasn't acceptance, not quite yet, but it was something very much like hope. The Grand Council chamber buzzed with diplomatic activity as both human and stellar representatives worked through the complex details of their alliance. Hey Newell sat beside her father, her hair shimmering with subtle colors, as she observed Jin Ho presenting Earth's proposals. The past few days had changed her perspective, but she still wasn't prepared for what happened next. The first warning came as a subtle vibration in the crystal walls. Most delegates didn't notice it, but Hey Newell saw Jin Ho pause mid-sentence, his eyes scanning the room with sudden alertness. Then the environmental alarms began to sound, their crystalline tones growing more urgent by the second. "The atmospheric processors," one of the technical advisors shouted, his hair turning almost white with panic. "Complete system failure in the primary core. Secondary systems aren't responding." The council chamber erupted into chaos. The atmospheric processors weren't just for comfort. They maintained the delicate balance of gases that both species needed to breathe. Without them, the air would quickly become toxic for everyone. Hey Newell rushed to the control panel, her hands flying over the crystal interface. "The backup systems are locked out," she reported, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Something's corrupted the main control protocols." "How long do we have?" Jin Ho asked, suddenly at her side. His presence was calm, focused, despite the growing panic around them. 20 minutes before oxygen levels become critical," she answered. "Less for your people. Your oxygen requirements are higher than ours." Jin Ho nodded, already pulling up technical schematics on a nearby display. "Show me the processor layout. There has to be a manual override somewhere." They worked together, Hey Newell translating complex stellar engineering concepts, while Jin Ho applied human problem-solving approaches they hadn't considered. Around them, other delegates were being evacuated, but neither of them moved from their posts. "Look," Jin Ho pointed to a section of the schematic. "Your systems are crystalline-based, similar to your architecture. What if we treat this like a living system instead of a mechanical one?" Hey Newell's hair brightened with sudden understanding. The processors would respond to direct biological input, but the energy required. She paused, realizing what it would mean. It could work, but it would take both of us. A human's electromagnetic field combined with a stellar's natural crystal resonance. "Then let's do it," Jin Ho said simply, holding out his hand. They raced through the palace corridors, down to the processor core. The air was already growing thin, making Jinho's breathing labored. But he didn't slow down. The processor chamber was a vast space, filled with towering crystals, each one normally pulsing with light and energy. Now they stood dark and silent. Here, Haynul positioned them at the central control crystal. Place your hands here and focus your thoughts on life, on breathing. She placed her hands next to his, their fingers almost touching. Haynul began the complex process of channeling her natural crystal resonance into the system. She felt Jinho beside her, his human energy different, but surprisingly compatible with her own. The central crystal began to glow faintly. "It's not enough," she gasped, feeling the strain. "We need more power." Without hesitation, Jinho stepped closer, his hands covering hers completely. The direct contact sent a shock through her system. She had never touched a human before. But instead of the revulsion she had once expected, she felt only strength flowing between them. The crystal responded, its glow intensifying. Around them, other crystals began to light up, forming a cascade of energy through the processor system. Haynul's hair blazed with effort and something else, something she wasn't ready to name. The chamber hummed back to life, processors reactivating one by one. Fresh air began flowing through the vents, and the emergency alarms finally fell silent. They had done it. Haynul opened her eyes to find Jinho looking at her with an expression of wonder that probably matched her own. They were still standing close, hands joined on the crystal, both breathing hard from the effort. "That was remarkable," Jinho said softly. "The way you channeled the crystal energy. Your adaptation to our technology was equally impressive." Haynul replied, surprised to find she truly meant it. "Most non-stellars can't interface with our systems at all." They stepped apart slowly, but something had changed between them. Haynul looked at Jinho, really looked at him, and saw not the primitive being she had once feared, but someone who had risked his life alongside her to save others. Emergency teams began flooding into the chamber, both human and stellar working together to secure the systems. Haynul watched as Jinho immediately began helping coordinate the recovery efforts, his previous understanding of their technology proving invaluable. Her father appeared beside her, his hair glowing with pride. "You worked well together," he observed quietly. "Yes," Haynul answered, watching Jinho guide a mixed team of technicians. "We did." Her hair shimmered with colors she couldn't quite control. Admiration, respect, and perhaps something more. In the crisis, she had forgotten about species differences, about her previous prejudices. All that had mattered was saving lives, and Jinho had proven himself more than equal to the task. The supposed primitive had shown intelligence, courage, and an unwavering dedication to their people's safety. Standing in the now stable processor chamber, Haynul realized that her world had shifted once again. But this time, the change didn't feel like ending. It felt like a beginning. The library crystals hummed softly as Haynul accessed another historical database, her hair glowing with intense concentration. She had been here since dawn, devouring information about Earth and its people. Not the sanitized reports she had grown up with, but true accounts from human archives that Jinho had provided. Images of Earth's great oceans filled the crystal display, vast bodies of water that dwarfed anything on her world. She watched in fascination as massive waves crashed against rocky shores, as storms whipped the sea into fury. These were the conditions that had shaped humanity, she realized. No wonder they had grown so adaptable. "I thought I might find you here." Jinho's voice came from behind her. He had grown accustomed to her research habits over the past few days. "What are you exploring today?" "Your oceans," Haynul replied, not taking her eyes from the display. "We have nothing like them. Our seas are calm, predictable. But these," she gestured to an image of a tsunami. "How did your species survive such chaos?" Jinho sat beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth, but not quite touching. "By learning to respect it," he said. "The ocean taught us humility. but also courage. Every time we ventured out on those waters, we risked everything. Newell pulled up another file, this one showing human art through the ages. Cave paintings gave way to Renaissance masterpieces, then to modern digital creations. You painted your dreams, she said softly, even before you had the words to describe them. Art helped us understand ourselves, Jin-Ho explained. Look at this one. He reached past her to select an image of Van Gogh's Starry Night. The artist never saw the stars this way through human eyes, but he felt them this way in his soul. Newell's hair shimmered with emotion as she studied the painting. The swirling stars reminded her of her own people's connection to the cosmos, but interpreted through such different eyes. We were taught that humans were incapable of such depth. Jin-Ho's laugh was gentle, understanding. We get that a lot. Most species see our brief lifespans and assume we can't achieve deep cultural understanding. They forget that limitation is exactly what drives us to create, to explore, to push boundaries. Newell called up more records. Human music from classical symphonies to modern compositions, literature spanning centuries, scientific discoveries that had revolutionized their understanding of the universe. Each piece added to her growing realization of how wrong she had been. Here, Jin-Ho said, selecting a particular file. This might interest you. The display filled with images of Earth's mountains. These taught us perseverance. When we were still earthbound, climbing these peaks was considered the ultimate challenge. Why risk it? Newell asked, though she thought she was beginning to understand. Because they were there. Jin-Ho smiled. Someone once said that humans climb mountains because they're there. It's part of who we are. We see a challenge, and we have to meet it. They spent hours going through the archives together. Jin-Ho shared personal stories of growing up on Earth, of feeling small under open skies, yet dreaming of the stars. Newell found herself sharing too, her own dreams, fears, and the gradual crumbling of her prejudices. I used to think human advancement was just copied from other species, she admitted. But you didn't copy. You observed, learned, and then made things uniquely your own. We're not perfect, Jin-Ho told her, his voice carrying that warmth that had become so familiar. We've made terrible mistakes. We've had wars, caused environmental disasters, hurt each other in countless ways. But we strive to be better. Each generation tries to learn from the past, to build something better for the future. His honesty touched something deep within Newell's soul. Here was no attempt to hide flaws or present an idealized version of humanity. Instead, Jin-Ho offered truth, complex, messy, but ultimately hopeful. Your people's drive to improve, to explore, to understand. Newell's hair glowed with new understanding. It's not just about survival, is it? It's about becoming more than you are. Jin-Ho nodded. Every human carries that drive. It's why we reached for the stars long before we had the means to touch them. It's why we keep pushing boundaries, asking questions, seeking connections with other species. As the library's ambient light dimmed to signal evening, Newell realized she had spent another whole day immersed in human culture. But unlike her previous studies, driven by duty and diplomatic necessity, this felt different. She wasn't just learning about humans anymore. She was beginning to understand them. Thank you, she said softly as they prepared to leave the library, for showing me the truth about your people. Jin-Ho's smile held that same honest warmth that had first caught her attention. Thank you for being willing to look past your initial impressions. Not everyone is brave enough to challenge their own beliefs. As they walked through the crystal corridors together, Newell's hair shimmered with new colors, understanding, respect, and something deeper that made her heart beat faster when Jin-Ho walked beside her. The truth about humans had transformed her, and she was beginning to think that transformation might be the greatest gift she had ever received. The message came in the dead of night, a subtle vibration in Newell's crystal communicator. Her hair flared with alarm as she read the encrypted warning. Someone was planning to sabotage the treaty signing ceremony. The source was anonymous, but the details were too specific to ignore. She found Jin-Ho already awake in his quarters, studying security protocols. One look at her face told him something was wrong. "Show me," he said simply, moving aside to make room for her at his desk. The warning mentioned specific security weaknesses, Hae-Newell explained, projecting the message onto his display. Things only someone with inside knowledge would know. Both human and stellar security has been compromised. Jin-Ho's eyes narrowed as he read. These access codes, they're recent. Someone high up in both our delegations is involved. His tactical training kicked in as he began mapping out potential threats. They worked through the night. Hae-Newell's understanding of stellar political factions combining with Jin-Ho's security expertise. Names and connections began emerging. A pattern of secret meetings, unexplained communications. "Look at this." Hae-Newell pointed to a series of crystalline data streams. Counselor Min has been accessing restricted diplomatic files, but his energy signature is wrong. Someone's using his credentials. Jin-Ho pulled up corresponding human security logs. Similar pattern here. Ambassador Chen's codes were used to access weapons protocols, but she was in meetings at the time. Dawn found them surrounded by evidence of a conspiracy reaching into both governments. Radical factions, unwilling to accept the alliance, had joined forces to ensure the treaty would fail, violently. They're planning an attack during the signing ceremony. Jin-Ho concluded, his voice grim. Both human and stellar extremists, working together to keep our peoples apart. Hae-Newell's hair darkened with determination. We have to take this to the councils. Both of them, together. Getting an emergency joint session proved challenging, but Hae-Newell's royal status combined with Jin-Ho's diplomatic credentials finally won them an audience. They stood together before the assembled leaders, their evidence displayed on massive crystal screens. Honorable members of both councils, Hae-Newell began, her voice steadied despite her racing heart. What we've uncovered threatens not just the treaty, but the future of both our peoples. Jin-Ho stepped forward, his presence solid and reassuring beside her. The attack was designed to trigger a war. Each side would blame the other for the violence, making peace impossible for generations. They presented their findings methodically, their words complementing each other as naturally as their investigation had. When one faltered, the other smoothly took over, their partnership evident in every exchange. The conspirators counted on our prejudices, Hae-Newell explained, her hair shimmering with passionate intensity. They believed our differences would blind us to their manipulation. But they underestimated something crucial, Jin-Ho added. The very cooperation they sought to prevent proved to be their undoing. The evidence was irrefutable. Security teams moved swiftly, apprehending conspirators from both sides. Hae-Newell watched as the councils processed the magnitude of what they prevented. Standing there, seeing the respect in both human and stellar eyes, Hae-Newell realized something profound. Her work with Jin-Ho had started as duty, protecting the treaty, serving her people. But somewhere along the way, it had become something more. She glanced at him, noting how he stood tall despite his exhaustion, still fielding questions from council members. His dedication matched her own, not out of obligation, but out of genuine belief in what they were building together. The emergency session lasted hours. When it finally ended, Hae-Newell and Jin-Ho found themselves alone in the council chamber. The massive crystal displays still showed fragments of their investigation, proof of how well they worked together. "We did it," Jin-Ho said softly, turning to her with tired but triumphant eyes. "We did more than save the treaty," Hae-Newell replied, her hair glowing with colors she no longer tried to hide. "We proved why it's necessary, why our peoples are stronger together than apart." Jin-Ho stepped closer, his presence familiar now where it had once been alien. "Your insight into stellar politics was crucial. I couldn't have done this alone." "Nor I without your tactical experience," she admitted. "We truly are stronger together." Looking at him in the crystal-filtered light, Hey Newell understood that duty had transformed into something deeper, something real. The alliance they had fought to protect was no longer just a diplomatic necessity. It was a symbol of what their peoples could achieve together. The next day, as preparations for the treaty signing resumed with heightened security, Hey Newell found herself looking forward to the future with new eyes. The fear and prejudice that had once clouded her vision were gone, replaced by something far more precious: hope, understanding, and a connection she had never expected to find. The great crystal cathedral pulsed with light as thousands of beings from both civilizations gathered for the historic union. Hey Newell stood in her preparation chamber, watching her hair shimmer with colors that reflected the joy in her heart. Her ceremonial silver robes caught the light of both suns streaming through the crystal walls, making her appear to glow from within. "You look beautiful," Mira said softly, adjusting the crystal diadem on Hey Newell's head. "Who would have thought, all those months ago, that you would be smiling on this day?" Hey Newell remembered her tears of despair when she first learned of the arranged marriage. How different everything looked now, how far she had come from those early fears and prejudices. In another chamber, Jin Ho was preparing in his own way. He wore the formal diplomatic uniform of Earth, but with subtle crystal accents that honored his new people. He had spent weeks learning the ancient stellar marriage rituals, determined to show proper respect for their traditions. The ceremony began with the traditional call of union, crystal tones resonating through the cathedral. Hey Newell walked the luminescent path alone, as stellar tradition demanded. Each step made the crystals beneath her feet glow, creating a trail of light that would remain until the ceremony's end. Jin Ho entered from the opposite direction, his path marked by soft earth music that blended surprisingly well with the crystal tones. Their eyes met across the space between them, and Hey Newell's hair blazed with emotions too deep for words. They met at the central crystal dais, where both Earth and stellar officials waited. Hey Newell could see the gathered crowd, humans and stellars sitting together, their previous divisions forgotten in this moment of unity. "Who comes to join their paths?" the stellar high priest asked in the traditional way. "I, Newell, daughter of stars," she responded, her voice clear and strong. "I, Jin Ho, son of Earth," he answered in perfect stellar language, bringing surprised murmurs of approval from her people. The ceremony wove together elements from both cultures. They exchanged Earth's traditional rings, made of crystal that responded to both their touch. They shared the stellar binding of lights, their joined hands creating patterns of illumination in the cathedral's crystal heart. Then came the moment Hey Newell had once dreaded but now anticipated with joy. Jin Ho's hands were warm as they took hers, his touch familiar and comforting. The ancient words of binding came naturally to both of them, spoken in alternating languages that seemed to dance together in the crystal-charged air. As Earth and stars bind their light, Jin Ho began in English. "So do we join our paths?" Hey Newell continued in stellar. "Two peoples, two hearts," he spoke. "One future, one soul," she answered. Their voices joined for the final phrase, each speaking in the other's tongue. The crystal cathedral resonated with their words, creating harmonics that would be remembered for generations. As the two suns reached their apex, casting double shadows through the crystal walls, Hey Newell looked into Jin Ho's eyes. She saw there everything that had changed her world: his intelligence, his compassion, his unwavering belief in their shared future. "The stars themselves brought us together," Jin Ho whispered to her in ancient stellar, words he had practiced countless hours to perfect. His pronunciation was flawless, carrying all the subtle tonal qualities that made the ancient language so beautiful. Hey Newell's hair rippled with colors of love and joy as she responded in English, "And Earth gave us the strength to grow together." The final binding ritual began, crystal energy flowing between them as they stood in the center of the cathedral. Hey Newell felt the warmth of Jin Ho's spirit, so different from her own yet perfectly complementary. What had once seemed alien now felt like coming home. Their combined energy made the cathedral crystals sing, creating a light show that left both humans and stellars in awe. It was a physical manifestation of what they had discovered, that differences could become strengths when hearts were open to change. As they sealed their union with both human and stellar traditions, Haynul reflected on her journey. She had feared this marriage would end her life as she knew it. Instead, it had opened her to possibilities she had never imagined. Jin-Ho had shown her that true strength lay not in maintaining barriers, but in having the courage to break them down. The celebration that followed was as mixed as their union. Earth music played on crystal instruments. Stellar light dances performed to human rhythms. Both peoples celebrated together, finding joy in their differences rather than fear. Later, as the twin suns set and the stars began to appear, Haynul and Jin-Ho stood in their private garden. The same garden where they had first truly talked, where prejudice had first begun to fade into understanding. "Did you ever imagine we would end up here?" she asked, her hair glowing with contentment. Jin-Ho smiled, touching one of the softly pulsing flowers. "I hoped," he admitted. "From the moment I saw you watching me from behind that crystal column, I hoped we could find our way to understanding." Haynul leaned against him, marveling at how natural it felt now. "You changed everything I thought I knew," she said softly. "We changed each other," he corrected gently. "And in doing so, maybe we've changed our worlds too." Above them, the stars shone down on human and stellar alike, their light touching all without prejudice or fear. What had begun as political necessity had become something far more powerful, a bridge between worlds, built on understanding, respect, and love.